Are they? Yes, no? Okay. Yeah, so they are going out. I'll provide the PDF if anyone wants a copy to look at and peruse. But we're primarily a software security consulting firm, and what that means is we help companies everywhere in every place from the design all the way up to the development and into the maintenance and release of software. We help them build, maintain, and sustain secure software and everything that goes into that. And of course, games are just one form of software in a very unique and exciting industry. They come with their own set of business risks, their own set of challenges, given that there are many different flavors of games. There's many different platforms that games can exist on. There's a lot of different revenue models, all of that. And so that's some of the things that we'll touch on and how threat modeling is unique to those various elements of the gaming industry. And so here's our rough agenda for today. Can you guys see? Oh, all right. My mouse is apparently non-existent, so that's okay. So here's our rough agenda for today. And I'll try not to just read slides back to you and actually talk through the slides instead of read them. But yeah. All right. So getting things started, threat modeling. There's a lot of different nomenclature that goes around the industry on what threat modeling actually is. There's a lot of different companies that have a different idea of what it means to threat model something. The way we look at it at Cigital is a little bit different than some other folks, and we look at it very much in a control flow sense as opposed to a data flow. But in general, threat modeling is the depiction of a system, and a system can be one piece of software operating in a network, and it can be a SOA-based infrastructure with many different web services interacting with one another, hosted in the cloud. A system can be a lot of things. It can be an embedded system that's running, some customized proprietary operating system, communicating over a bunch of proprietary network protocols, with some back end doing something. And basically, we're going to build a pictographic representation of what that system is, all of the things that make up that system, and we're going to overlay that pictographic representation of the system with assets, controls, threats, trust boundaries, and we're going to use that representation to kind of think about and represent various attack vectors that a set of threat actors can carry out against the system to compromise assets. And there's a lot of different security activities that are used and applied throughout the industry. There's pen testing, there's you can do a lot of things with reconnaissance, like we've had all the red teaming and social engineering-esque talks today, the privacy talks today. You can learn a lot of stuff about organizations, about people fitting within an organization, and we do all that stuff as well. But really, that's a lot of pen testing stuff and source code review. A lot of that helps you identify very tactical point-in-time bugs or issues that are happening at a snapshot in time. So let's say a cross-site scripting issue or a SQL injection issue or buffer overflow, whatever the case may be. A threat modeling and design analysis is more focused on capturing and identifying the other class of potential issues, and that is design flaws. And research over time has shown that design flaws and implementation bugs make up about 50-50 each with regards to vulnerabilities that manifest within software systems. So to get started with talking about threat modeling in this presentation, we're going to talk about a little bit of the syntax that we use here at Cigital. So we have assets, controls, threat agents, trust zones, attack vectors, and the attack surface. And I'll iterate through each of these, just giving you a really quick kind of overview of what those are after I have some beer. And the special is fantastic, by the way. I don't know who picked the special, but it is good. So assets. Assets are probably the most critical thing that we need to really think about when we're designing and building systems. So an asset is any piece of sensitive functionality or sensitive information that needs to be protected. Anything in the system that needs to be protected, whether that's user passwords, whether that's financial data, whether that's game assets such as your, a player's inventory in in like an MMORPG game, whether that's in-app purchase content that you don't want somebody to have without paying for it, things to that effect. A control, alternatively, is the thing that protects the asset. And that could be anything from parameterized queries if you're trying to defend against some value stored in a backend database. That could be something like output encoding. It could be any number of things. But controls protect assets, in short. A threat agent is an entity that is attempting to attack your system or intending to cause harm to your system or your organization. And as we can see in this little diagram on the bottom right, a threat agent uses an attack vector to either circumvent or bypass a control, to attack an asset, or to attack a component which is holding some asset. And ultimately, they're after that asset. And yeah, so, you know, that's basically the biggest takeaway from threat modeling that you're going to get is the various ways in which threats or threat agents are going to be able to compromise assets. And thinking about and reasoning about these things while you're going through the design stages, and then also after a system is all up and running, you can do this stuff again and, you know, see the various ways in which you've already implemented your system, and then you can go back, refactor things as needed to protect those sensitive assets. So thinking about what your threats should be. So all threats are different, as I'm sure you guys you know and appreciate. You can have anything from, you know, the script kiddies, the very, very basic threat actors who are just using a bunch of canned, packaged up tools, the point and click, auto-pwn, all of that crap that they can find and download on the internet, to very, very sophisticated adversaries. And that could be a single adversary. In the gaming industry, you know, we typically don't think about skilled, advanced, crazy threat actors, but the guys who really are doing in-depth game cracking and bypassing cheat engines or cheat detection engines, doing a lot of that low-level reverse engineering and patching work, it really is complex stuff. And carrying out those attacks is, you know, it takes a lot of sophistication, it takes a lot of knowledge, it takes a lot of patience, and understanding of the tool set used to do those things. So debuggers, disassemblers, things like that. And also, you know, if we reason about threat modeling in the context of other systems like financial systems, for instance, you can run into the case of the nation states, the organized crime, all of that. But these are just some of the ways in which you can think about and break out various classes of threats that you want to reason about within your threat model. And so this is a little bit of an eye strain, this slide, but this is the threat modeling process at a high level. And basically, at the start of it, I'll break it up into a couple of different chunks. At the start of it, we need to first understand what the system is, what it does, how it's built. We usually do that from a security perspective, since security is oftentimes not embedded within the development lifecycle. We're kind of you know, outside looking in or advising inwards. We usually do this through a series of interviews, artifact reviews, things to that effect. So we need to interface with the people who designed, who built, and who implemented this system to really understand everything that goes into it. And we can understand the various components that go into it, the network protocols that are used to stitch those components together, the trust boundaries, as in the network zones that various components fit into. We need to understand what the assets of the system are, where those actually live, the controls that protect them, things like that. We then need to start, you know, going back to our previous slide, we then need to start reasoning about the threats that are relevant to our system. And once we understand the threat structure, we can overlay that information onto our system diagram that we've built at this stage. And so then we're about fifth bullet down? Yeah, fifth bullet down. So once we've overlaid our threat structure onto our system diagram, we can start to enumerate and think through, you know, being the creative security individuals that we are, various doomsday scenarios or attack scenarios that can occur based on how things are built and laid out. And we can do this using, you know, not only our creativity and experience and what we've seen in other places and other systems that we've worked on, but we can use a set of canonical attack vectors based on various design patterns that are used. For instance, if you're using a third-party payment system that is, sending information over HTTP, certain attacks that are going to be vulnerable to that. If you know that a password storage scheme was built using the Spring framework, and it's an older version of Spring, you can extrapolate that password storage system was stored using an insecure password storage scheme and not something a little bit more progressive like an adaptive hash, for instance. So we build out these misuse abuse cases, these possible attack scenarios based on how the various threats exist within our system, where they exist within our system, what components they can interact with. And once that's all done, we sit back, we think about the results, and we use the threat model to identify potentially immediately exploitable things, but also use it as a guide to figure out where we might want to go and do more pen testing, more source code review, more secure design consulting, things like that. We use it to guide other areas of our security program. And these bullets are kind of an iterative process in many cases because, if you are using a threat model as a living document within an organization, so if you're doing this internally, you have a development team within your organization, a security team within your organization, you can build a threat model once at the design stage, revisit it at different stages or different release cycles and see how things have changed, what new components have been added, things to that effect, what new controls have been added to address a potential threat, things like that. So the business risks, in any security context, we need to consider business risk. Because as security professionals, if we cannot illustrate business risk to the companies that we're working for or the companies that we're working with, if we're consulting, then it's very likely that we're not going to get anything done and that we just look like the boy who cried wolf, like the Monty Python video earlier for those that saw it with the rabbit. So, we need to be able to articulate what risk a particular vulnerability is going to cause that business. And in the gaming industry, we've got some unique risks. Some of these are, of course, overlapping with other industries. So denial of service, of course, is very common, and financial services don't like denial of service just as much as gaming companies don't like denial of service. Account theft and account hijacking, obviously not a good thing in many, many systems. However, piracy is one of those interesting things. Fraud is one of those interesting things, and cheating is one of those interesting things that can sometimes you don't necessarily have to protect it based on the revenue model. In many cases, it's not ideal. For instance, if you're releasing a single player game, you don't want that game to be pirated. Probably, it depends on your business goals. But it's more than likely you want certain DLP or DRM rather, certain DRM controls in place to prevent that game from being just outright pirated, sold, and downloaded on Pirate Bay or insert file sharing or torrent site here. And so breaking away from the secure design or the high assurance security wizards who are waving their hands at everything and saying stop, everything needs to be extremely secure, everything needs to be perfect before you can go to release. It may not always be the case in the gaming industry, and some assets and some patterns are worth really getting behind and really putting a lot of eggs in those baskets to protect, and some are you may just want to outright allow them depending on the revenue model or the business model of your game. If you're releasing a freemium game that's based all on in-app purchases, you may not care how many people download that, or even if the game is 99 cents and your primary form of revenue is coming from in-app purchases, you may not care if people are able to bypass that initial 99-cent purchase the long as they still have to go through the IAP to download all that additional content. And so then we get into this realm where we have the prevent, the control, monitor, or the allow. And this stuff may change every so often depending on, again, the business model, the revenue model. But from our experience, this is usually how things break down is, these things on the left are stuff that we see companies, outright, we know we have to protect this stuff day in, day out. This is what's important to our business, our reputation, and of course our ongoing revenue stream. And the stuff in the middle is, we could go either way. We could invest in controls to monitor certain, monitor cheating to a certain threshold. And for instance, with the game Titanfall, they monitor cheating, and if they catch cheating at a certain threshold, they'll pair cheaters up as a deterrent and have them fight against each other in their own little cheating death match. Other things, if you are creating bots that that obtain a certain level of efficiency within a game, then you may get kicked off, or you may have items removed, or things like that. So it's all dependent on the business. So we as security people can't just red flag everything and say this is an immediate problem. We have to consider the business risks. So moving past that, modeling the system. So as I said, we build our threat model initially from a system model. So we have to pictographically construct what a gaming system looks like. And again, a gaming system can be many things. It can be anything from the Angry Birds mobile app, or Candy Crush communicating with Facebook servers for authentication and session state management. It could be a gaming system like an Xbox One or PS4. It could be the MMORPG like World of Warcraft or League of Legends, things like that. These things are these examples are all wildly different with regards to platform, revenue model, all of that, but it all kind of fits in. And so we have to figure out how that system is built, how control flows throughout the system from lower privileged users to higher privileged users or components. And we have to capture the various app layer and network layer protocols that are stitching together all of those systems. And so this next slide, and you don't have to kind of read and interpret the entire thing, is a very basic system diagram. And you can ignore the legend on the bottom for right now. But if you notice, we kind of have things broken up into three primary sections. We have the internet-facing, kind of untrusted stuff on the left, minus the CDM right now, but the untrusted stuff on the left. So the player is over there. The game client is installed on their system. The launcher and the patcher service is installed on their system. They have a web browser that can be used to interface with our game servers. And then within our games data center, our own network environment, we have all these different components. We have the servers that are handling the distributed world and all the various components that exist on there. We have a centralized authentication service. We have payment. We have a general content-driven website. We have a payments website that's handling recurring revenue, information collection, and the actual processing, and then some back-end databases, things to that effect. So trust boundaries, and I'll go back here to let you guys read this, and then I'll click back really quickly. Trust boundaries. There's two different types of trust boundaries that we use, anyways. And one is a system or a machine boundary, and that is one server between another server. Those would be considered two different machine boundaries. So if you have a database server and application server, those are two different machine boundaries. And then you also have network boundaries or trust zones, and those are we have the player LAN over here, and you can't see where I'm pointing, but you have the player LAN up on the top left, and then you have the data center. And you can get a little bit more granular if you need to, and you can go into and zero in on restricted network zones within that organization's data center that might store PCI relevant data, such as payment systems or payment data being stored for recurring payments, or just general databases that are housing sensitive information. And so moving into the assets, these are just some generic assets again in our very overly simplified gaming system here. Some of the ones that we've reviewed have been exponentially more complex, and I initially attempted to anonymize one of those and put it up on the slides, and it almost gave me a stroke when I tried looking at it in PowerPoint, so I couldn't do that. But these are some sample assets relative to this particular game. So we have the general game content. So consider our sample game here is something like World of Warcraft. And, so you pay for the initial client to be installed on your system, whether it's $20, $50, whatever. You pay an ongoing subscription fee, so therefore you supply your credit card information. That credit card information or whatever payment method you supply is stored and charged on a recurring basis. And then you have a bunch of you have various assets. So you have your in-game inventory, your the armor and stuff that you have, the weapons, the currency, the virtual currency that you have, the experience points and such associated with your character. And then you have some other things like the data that influences fraud and cheat detection services on the back end. And we consider that an asset, again, because it's a sensitive piece of functionality or data that we don't want to be manipulated because we don't want people cheating and defrauding our game. And then on the internal side, because we do also consider internal threats in many cases, and especially in this case, we have the customer service of the CSR accounts. And CSRs in many cases, as we kind of talked about leading up to this in the various social engineering talks, CSRs and some other privileged people within an organization will have a lot of functionality that they legitimately need for their business role. But unfortunately, if those people get compromised, if their credentials get compromised, then you can do a lot of damage. And this is one of those areas where defense in depth is absolutely critical, because oftentimes in the CSR model, you have people with access to the most sensitive information in your system, whether that's passwords, payment data, what have you, getting paid the least amount of money in your security hierarchy. So the model is just kind of flipped on its head. You have it's like the cleaning ladies or the cleaning staff who have access to your entire building, whereas people within your organization who get compensated very well may not have that level of access. Same exact idea. So, and what I meant earlier by overlaying, and I apologize, I think some of these are coming a little bit fuzzy, but you'll be able to see it more clearly in the slides. But what I meant by overlaying onto the system model, the threat structure, this is exactly what I meant. So where an asset or where any of the components that we consider within the threat model lie, we place that exactly on the diagram. So for instance, with the player database over in the kind of middle right upper portion, we have two assets residing there. We have the player's information. So that is, the player's personal information, their account information, things like that. And then we also have their credentials. And there's, other various assets throughout, as you guys can read. So, of course, the controls, again, are the things that need to protect the assets. They're their sole purpose in life is to protect a given asset. And so, again, these are just some of the controls within our simplified system that, without making the diagram too hard to interpret in a very quick manner, we'd like to pair the controls right up with the asset that they're protecting. And the reason that we do this is that when you're reasoning about a threat being able to access an asset, and that workflow representing a vulnerability, if you identify an asset on your threat model that does not have a control associated with it, then that very well may be, a red flag for you as a security or designer to consider. If as a threat agent, I don't have to bypass, circumvent, beat a control to compromise something, then there's something wrong. And we should maybe consider it and put some layers of defense around that. So a couple of canonical threats for the gaming industry, and again, some of these are universal. You almost always have to consider the internet-facing attacker who's just out there existing in the world, just attacking your systems. You have the malicious users, so the players who will actually pay for the game legitimately or download it legitimately, who after doing that initial bit of revenue, or giving you that initial bit of revenue, and they may steal it, who knows, but let's assume they just obtain the game. They then try to break it further, whether that's to buy it once, crack it and then release it to the masses, whether that's buy it, release some weaponized exploits for it that allow mass cheating at scale, whether that's compromising all of your in-app purchases and releasing those for, plug and play for the masses. Those kind of users are oftentimes the most, narrowed or zeroed in on by the gaming industry, just because of their the skill that come with that particular threat agent in many cases. Using the tool sets that they do. You then have, if you consider multiplayer games or land-based games, you have attackers, and this can actually kind of piggyback off of the second bullet. You have attackers who reside on the same LAN, either exploiting the game client, sniffing game traffic, performing other various cheats. Like, for instance, if I'm playing Counter-Strike with a bunch of my friends on the same LAN, and there's an exploit in Counter-Strike that allows me to, outright, win any game that within the people playing on the same LAN that I am. I'm going to have a huge advantage over them, and you can insert any exploit that you want into that hypothetical scenario. Well, not so hypothetical, but into that scenario. And then you've got some internal threats. So you may have a malicious customer service representative. Again, with those people being paid the least amount of money in your organization, they don't have as much motivation to say, I'm going to really protect my $12.50 an hour, and I'm never going to betray this company. There's no way I won't do it. Because if somebody strolls in and consider a very high security system, and they're like, I will pay you $50,000 right now to do something nefarious, and I assure you it won't show up on anybody's radar. They may not have the technical know-how to understand that their activity is going to be logged, or that $50,000 may just be too tempting, and they may take advantage of the capabilities that they have in their role to do that nefarious thing. Whereas somebody who's if you try to bribe a CISO with that amount of money, you're going to have a much different response as that briber. Then you have other, internal attackers, such as just the internal LAN attacker. So somebody who just gets a job at a gaming company is residing on that internal network. Depending on how that network is segmented, you may be able to do nefarious things as well. So if you look at, towards the top of our model, if you guys can see that, you've got some RESTful calls being made over clear text HTTP, including things to the authentication service, including things from the payments website. And right now, we don't have any segmentation around that. So an internal network attacker may very well be able to just sniff network traffic and get access to user sessions, to user passwords, to payment data as it's being passed around the internal network and ultimately into a database for storage, things like that. All right, so using the threat model, if we step back, actually I'll go through this slide and then step back just a little bit. I mentioned before with the pairing of the assets and controls, the big thing that you want to be able to step away from at the end of this is how are threats going to attack my system? Are there any paths in which any one of the threats that I've kind of reasoned about, internal threat actors, the malicious users, any of them, can reach an asset without having to go through a control, or if they do have to go through a control, how easy is that control to circumvent? So we talked about the password storage security just a little bit ago. Again, if you're using vulnerable libraries to do your password storage security, and let's say you're using this library that is, has all these rave reviews on, some shady website that says, your passwords you'll never be the next LinkedIn if you use this library to secure your passwords, and all it's doing is MD5 hashing them. Then, you as the developer are putting yourself in a bad spot if that password database ever gets lifted, because you will be the next LinkedIn. Your stuff will get cracked. And so you have to kind of quantify and reason about how strong those controls are that are protecting the assets. And you want them to be relative. You don't want Probably, depending on your business. Again, you don't want some high assurance, super secure control protecting some asset that you may not really care about. Again, going back to that table of the things that we need to outright prevent and then control and monitor. And then, of course, you may allow them. Just make sure to tie it back into the business risks. So considering when to do threat models. So, this is just some ideas. Within the development process, it's usually best to do somewhat of and this is more of a hypothetical over here on the left, because you don't have a system to actually go and, review. You can't validate anything in code. You can't validate anything by launching an Nmap scan against it, or by, actually interfacing with it. So, this is going to be a very hypothetical, hand wavy with the architects and developers discussion here on the left. But it's going to give you a good chance to really start to reason about how the security of your system will come to be over time once you get into the test, the testing, the coding, and the builds. And then, of course, once you actually have a product ready to test and start to analyze, is the next big area that doing a threat model is very useful. And this is where these two stages, and then you can also do it after the fact once you're in production. And it's oftentimes when we get brought in to do threat models, is you can have this living document that's kind of evolved over time. So a couple of things to consider specific to the gaming industry, and I've kind of hammered on this throughout the talk, is different game genres are going to have different threat agents that they're concerned about. They're going to have different assets, and they're going to have different controls that they use to protect those assets, because again, we may not want just a pointless control, because development time is money. And of course, the revenue model, all of that is going to be very different. So I'm a massive Batman fan, and I have 2 tattoos and another one soon to come on Thursday relevant to Batman. So I'm a Batman nerd. So unfortunately, due to copyright, I can have Batman splashed all over this presentation. However, I do want to illustrate the differences between these various revenue models. So just quick show of hands, how many people are familiar with these two games or classes of games? All right, so a lot of people, that's excellent. Yes. And so the Batman Arkham games, for anyone who isn't familiar with them, they're just single-player games available for consoles. You can get them off of Steam, what have you. And you play as Batman, you go kick ass, take names, and save the world, or save Gotham, anyways. And it's very self-contained. There are some online challenges, but they're very limited. There are some bits of DLC that you can download after you pay for them, or downloadable content. But ultimately, it's very contained within the player's system. You're not playing against a bunch of other players, all of that. Whereas the DC Universe game is a free to download. There are some premium versions that you can download, but mostly it's a free to download MMORPG, and you select from a big class of characters. Typical RPG, right? You select your character, your class. You start to go out, do missions, gain experience, get items, all of that, and it's a lot more long term to you're just kind of working through this story that's relevant to the character and side that you're playing on. And so the risks that these two companies face are going to be two very, very, very different things. So cheating in the Batman Arkham games, it may not be relevant whatsoever. A much bigger risk to the Batman Arkham games may be if what if a user can, piracy is one thing that I won't get into. Piracy's a risk in both of these, but let's say piracy of the DLC content. So what if I'm able to, automate the generation of accounts that have free access to DLC? And this has happened in a couple of games, and I won't name which, and I don't believe this was one of them, so I think I'm protected there. But upon generating or upon activating a new account, you were granted access to DLC content for a given game. And if you can script out the creation of new accounts, if there's no email registration or email activation, we're going to send you a link, you click on it, verify that you're the owner of this email, all of that. But you can just create arbitrary accounts and then activate them through the game servers and get access to your DLC. You, as an attacker, could carry out this attack, download 50,000 instances of the DLC, and then go resell that at at your own price. That may be a huge hit to the revenue of Warner Brothers and their Batman Arkham games. Consequently, or alternatively, with the DC Universe games, visible cheating is something that could very well destroy the game. So there's a very big difference between cheating, where, and this falls into the kind of control and monitor stage, but cheating just on its own, if somebody can kind of just, unbeknownst to anybody else, just kind of exist and get points and, make themselves feel good about them, make themselves feel good while they're, trapped inside for hours and hours on end figuring this out, that's kind of a minimal risk to the business. Whereas visible cheating, where, everywhere they walk, people just, drop dead and all their inventory flows into their things, or, they can automatically win any player versus player battle, or, things like that, even though they're grossly, grossly weaker or less prepared or less skilled or whatever than the person they're playing against. That oftentimes has a very, very bad reputation hit against the organization. And when people are not paying, or when people are not playing these games, they're not making the company money. So, very similar to the first talk today about, they're investing all of these dollars to keep your eyes fixated on their content. It's the exact same idea here. So the longer that you exist in their game, even though it's a free-to-play game, you're making them more money through the in-app purchases, through advertisements that they're shipping you, through all of the things that they're collecting. So, two very, very different examples, even though they're both Batman themed and from the same set of studios. So some other things that need to be considered in the gaming industry, and this is a little bit more unique than many other industries, because financial services, a lot of it's just web-based stuff. You interact with Chase.com. Chase.com has a bunch of web services that it interacts with, and then it sends stuff back to database servers. Many banks operate like this, and it's very similar for other industries. Gaming, the gaming industry is unique because they almost have to account for so many different platforms and all of that. And you've probably heard the term "trusted on busted," where you're trying to ship trusted software, a trusted system, to something where an attacker has complete control over that thing. And so there's been technologies that have been kind of pushed out to the masses, commercial and free, and just general design patterns to help protect against these things, like the Arcsand and Metaphoric commercial products, for instance, that do binary security. So you can build your game client in such a way that it makes it harder to conduct reverse engineering attacks. Actually, we'll step back. So, in making it more difficult to conduct those attacks, you can kind of, you can almost take the advantage away from the attacker and kind of keep the ball in your court, when considering, much more open platforms. So, for instance, in the gaming industry, PCs are oftentimes considered the hardest to test because of all the various configurations and all of that than, let's say, game consoles, because game consoles ideally are supposed to be much more controlled. It's a very controlled, restricted environment until the homebrew community comes through and just kicks the doors down and says, we're going to install Linux on everything, and your system security is laughable. So testing on game consoles, there's not as much concern usually with protecting game clients on those consoles, because they kind of inherit the trust from the game console provider. It's almost, when you consider cloud-hosted PCs, has anyone heard of NVIDIA's Grid service by chance? All right, so a few people. So Grid is a cloud-hosted gaming PC platform. So you basically have a gaming PC, a gaming rig that's hosted in their cloud environment, and you interact with it through a browser-like client. and they're trying to remove that element of the unknown platform being in the attacker's hands, and keeping that letting the game provider inherit the security properties of their deployment. Yeah. So threat modeling in general, it's not a tool or a process that is specific to the gaming industry. You can threat model all the things. You can threat model, in the gaming industry specifically, you can threat model the client itself that goes on the software. So if we step back to our model here, it would be that top left box. You could get much more granular with that top left box and how everything gets installed on that system. So for instance, one risk would be the fact that the launcher and patcher is getting content from the CDM over HTTP, and that fact may result in an attacker, if that launcher patcher is running as administrator and it's receiving content over HTTP to download and execute some executable code, then as an attacker on the LAN, I may be able to inject myself into that network connection, force them to download a nefarious or malicious executable, and get that launcher to execute that code as admin on the user system, gaining remote code execution rights. That's one example. You can threat model the actual game platform itself, so the game consoles, those cloud-hosted environments, things like that. You can threat model proprietary network protocols or authentication protocols, all of the various server-side components, the distributed worlds, the payment systems, the storage systems, all of that. And my point in pointing out all of these things that you can threat model is the fact that a lot of these things, a lot of these patterns have been looked at in some way, shape, or form throughout our existence as a field. And in software engineering, there's it's pretty common to reuse components that are proven, that have been well reviewed, and that's why we rely on industry standards for encryption like AES, because we know that AES has been reviewed by a lot of smart people, instead of trusting your mom and pop shop cryptographer to say hey, I got this awesome new crypto protocol that you might want to try because it's awesome and I haven't told anybody about it. That should be a red flag, and you probably want to stay away from that if you can. But the point here is that software engineering is pulling from reliable and trusted components, and in the gaming industry we can do the same thing. Not only from a software engineering and development perspective when we're building our components. So using a reliable game engine, such as Unreal or Unity or Cry or any of those commercial AAA studios engines that have that are built on reliable and proven technologies. But as you're building your back end, use trusted, updated frameworks. Don't use things that are old, out of date, not reviewed, not supported, things like that. And a lot of these patterns, these are just three. There are many others, and I'm happy to chat about them with folks afterwards. But a lot of these patterns have crossover into other industries, and the security in the gaming industry, as I alluded to earlier, is very focused on protecting the game client. Trying to make sure that people can't do in-memory value exchanges and swapping out their low health for high health, or giving themselves unlimited gold, things like that. That's where a lot of research and focus has been on. But all of the other necessary things to go into a well-designed and functional game, have crossover into other industries where those things have been very thoroughly reviewed. And so, as game designers and game developers and security professionals working in this industry, we can pull from that experience and help integrate it into the development process. So we talked a little bit about the trusted unbusted a little while ago, but another question to just kind of consider and ask yourselves is, not only what kind of risks does your users present to you, your game, in terms of piracy, in terms of revenue loss, all of that, but what kind of risk does your game present to your users? For instance, if you're developing an inherently insecure game, and I'll use an example here, is we found that one studio that we were working with on one particular title, we're using a custom developed chat client within the game. So you know how you press like Shift Enter or whatever, and you can chat with other people in the world and blast out messages or do peer-to-peer messages, whatever. The thing was riddled with buffer overflows, and basically you could send out mass buffer overflow attacks to folks on the world that you were playing in. Just via the chat client. You could send out your payload through the chat client and get remote code execution on everybody else's system. And of course, the game client was running as admin because it had to run as admin. God forbid it run as anything else. But, ask yourself these questions is, you have to consider both sides of the coin because they're both very important. If that flaw had made it out to production, and it was discovered and exploited in the wild, it could have been absolutely disastrous for this company. And thank God it didn't. But just something to consider. And I kind of alluded to some of the values of some of this stuff earlier in the talk. But of course, defense in depth is an absolute must. The more green boxes, if you're doing the asset control approach to threat modeling, the more green boxes you can have next to your sensitive assets or on the way to those sensitive assets, the better. Make sure that if an attacker is going to compromise an asset, then they're going to have to go through a lot of pain and trouble and security testing wizardry to get to that asset. Throughout your development process, make sure that you have various touch points, whether those are architecture discussions, whether those are pen tests, whether those are code reviews or automated code reviews, just checking for memory leakage issues or have network scanning stuff going on, looking for vulnerable ports that are open, out-of-date software, things like that. Have as many touch points as possible without grinding development to a halt, because ultimately you want security to be an enhancement to the product, not an inhibitor. And that's a whole nother topic in itself. And as you move into DevOps land and automating all the things. So using threat modeling to drive other security activities. So admittedly, this is a little bit of a heavier weight process than running point and click scan or something like that, as I'm sure you can reason from this presentation is it takes a lot of human thought and human intervention to kind of reason about how the system is put together, think about what the attacks are going to be, think about where everything has to live, all of that. And all of that human time spent on something is ultimately time spent that they can't go do other things. And we don't yet have intelligent enough machines to do this stuff, or at least not that they're not intelligent enough, but we don't have the software necessarily to do all of this, given how complex some things are. But I'm sure we'll get there someday, and that'll be fantastic. So also, these last two things are kind of intertwined together, but consider the value of the asset that you're trying to protect. Ultimately, if you have that low value asset, that's not where you want to be throwing all of your security development and security engineering budget at. You want to be protecting all of the very high value assets. It makes perfect sense when you step back and think about it. But we've seen many organizations just redirect their security budgets in the exact wrong or opposite direction, and ultimately it's come back to bite them in negative ways. And so wrapping up now. So does anyone have any questions or anything? And we've got about 6 minutes until we flip the room into dinner and such and get more beers. So yeah. Uh-huh. So the question was focused around whether there has been any significant enhancements in DRM and whether it works any better nowadays. The answer is kind of. So there's a few new a few new developments out there. Like Microsoft is putting out, like their Play Ready service, and there's a few other companies who are kind of piggybacking on like the iTunes DRM, original DRM model, and like Kindle's DRM and stuff like that. But ultimately, there exists nothing out there currently that has not been broken. And in the research that I've done, a lot of the DRM has focused mostly on, protection of physical media, and ultimately that ends up going more towards, protecting like the Blu-ray drive players and the discs that are going out, mostly movies on them, and not a lot has gone into, protecting games, because ultimately we're moving towards a very, very digital distribution model, or at least digital distribution heavy model for gaming. And like Steam, for instance, has actually done, they're one of the bigger. Some people love them, some people hate them, but they're one of the, they call themselves pioneers, and I kind of agree with them in this case. But what they're doing is they're doing account-specific, they're creating account-specific content encryption keys. And so, when I have my Steam account, it will create a content encryption key for my account, and it'll encrypt a portion of whatever game binary I download. So if I want to download, one of the new Star Wars games or the new GTA 5 game, it'll encrypt part of that game client with my specific account key, and that account key is of course tied to my account. So when I go to another laptop or a friend's PC, I can just log into my account, and assuming that the game is there, I can decrypt that part of it and go ahead and play the game. But other users on that same system logged into their own Steam accounts won't have that same account key and be able to decrypt the same part of the game client and get past it. So that's one of the bigger, more popular approaches out there that I've seen right now. And a lot of folks are actually opting towards the, to hell with DRM, we're just not going to do it and piss our users off, and get money other ways. So, hope that helps. Yep. Right. Yeah. So, it's more of a comment that the most legitimate and effective DRM mechanism out there right now is to make it almost, just built into the purchasing process and completely transparent to the users. And DRM has a nasty reputation. Of course, publishers and producers and such want to protect their intellectual property, and who can blame them? But the biggest complaint against DRM has not been because these people want to protect their intellectual property. It's because it's an enormous pain in the ass. And yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, yeah. So just recounting an experience where I think I heard it all, that the only version that worked was the one that was cracked running on top of the supposedly protected version. And yeah, that's oftentimes what happens in the pirating industry. Is people are, you'll have the crackers who will show that they can crack or beat a game's DRM, and it happens in the homebrew community as well, as they just want to get around the system security and prove that they can do it. It's more of an intellectual curiosity. And then you have all the pirators who come in after the fact and actually try to make money off of it. It's kind of a unique little black market in itself. Yeah. Sure. So it depends on the money. So there's been a few cases where, at least that we've been involved in, so some of our clients, most of our clients rely on us in a very like advisory role, where we help them, throughout their SDLC, do testing and design reviews, all of that. But when we get to a certain level of trust with some of our clients, we'll help them and advise them in somewhat of an incident response capacity. And we've had a couple of cases where studios kind of putting out marketplaces of sorts for new game content or new games in themselves, where they have a very, very big social. So it's almost like a social media component or extension of their organization. And as soon as you have, a YouTube video that, shows how you can download everything on their site for free, or they see black market sites pop up with everything at half off from their marketplace, we've seen that a few different times, and, we've had to like go through it. And, there's not really much you can do with the black market stuff. You have to kind of, take a plant your flag in the sand and say, we're going to defend everything from this point forward. And so it's like an engineering madhouse where, everyone is working like around the clock to figure out how to prevent, how it happened, how to prevent just that. And then, everyone's coding and designing things like nutcases. But yeah, I mean, we've observed it a few different times, at the weaponizing at scale. But even if it's not weaponizing in the sense where you're monetizing things, weaponizing it in the sense where it's, visible cheating at scale. So if somebody can put out a YouTube video and say, download this free little utility that I created for free and install it on your system, and it's going to allow you to, win any match. That visible element of cheating, like if you just go online and, some popular games and download like, such and such cheats, and you see a lot of times users won't play that game, thus impacting the revenue model. Yeah. So the question was focused around the motivations of the attackers developing these hacks, and these bots, things like that. Was that? All right. Sorry, it's hard to hear up here. What's that? Right. So a lot of times, it kind of circles back to the, the very, very stereotypical hacker persona that we brought up before. So, that malicious user threat agent is very oftentimes, doing it for more of a reputation boost. So they want to show in their little, hacker inner circles that they're the ones who broke this system, who did this thing. And that's why, at some of the, there's a few German-based conferences that, and RECon and Layer 1 down in LA, who have, a couple of these really kind of elite game hacker groups, like C Forever, a couple of other names are escaping me, but the guys who do like the console routing, and the guys who found that the PlayStation 3 was not using a secure random number generator in their in some of their encryption implementations, and thus were able to predict the master key used to sign all the binaries on the consoles, and thus be able to run any code that they wanted. So, and they just published that out there, and they're like, look at this cool shit that we can do, and they showed all the math behind it, and people are like, man, you guys are awesome. So, it's a lot of times that threat agent is very much a reputation or a, look what I can do kind of motivation. That's what we've seen anyways. And of course, every threat agent is going to have very different motivations. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I mean, consider really any hacking stuff. Like, we do this stuff because it's fun, right? And we get paid for it. Cool. And I think they're getting ready to flip the room, so I'll end there. But I'll be around at the dinner and around tomorrow if anyone wants to catch up and chat. And happy to chat. Oh, there it goes.
All right, thank you very much for coming out. If you did buy a VIP ticket or a speaker, please stick around in our lounge. We're going to have some cocktails and while we flip the room to dinner. And for the rest of you, we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you for coming out.